Great, we're recording it now. So just want to thank everybody so much for coming along to our Tea with the Experts webinars. It's just so wonderful to have you here, and I can't tell you how much joy we all get when we see the same sort of familiar names coming in, signing on again and again for these webinars. So thank you so much for coming along and joining us. I have just recorded the webinar, so if you want to go back and watch it again, or if for some reason you have to pop out and finish up early, that's absolutely fine. I will be sending the recording out to everybody who signed up to the webinar. So if you do, if life does get in the way, there's no problems at all. You will get access to the recording. I added a poll in here, which I'm hoping you all have access to. And it's just got a couple of questions in there. If you wouldn't mind answering them, just so we can get a bit of a guide as to your history, whether you've had heart surgery or had a heart event before, just so it gives the presenters a little bit of an idea as to who they're talking to. And we've also got your cameras will all be off and your microphones are also muted. But if you've got any questions at all, we'd love to have any questions from you. Please pop them in. We've got a Q&A box at the very bottom of the screen. So please type in anything you've got and I will get to the questions at the end of the webinar. So we are so incredibly fortunate today to have Maura Farrell and Kirkness join Chris and myself today. Maura Farrell has worked in the acute cardiology ward at Royal North Shore Hospital in Sydney for over 18 years, first as a nurse and then as a nursing unit manager. And since 2007, she's been the nurse manager for cardiac rehab and heart failure services. And she currently manages Royal North Shore, Ryde, Frenchs Forest and Hornsby areas. So for those of you who aren't from Sydney, that's a very large area. So we're very, very grateful to have Maura and her expertise here today with us. And Kirkness is a clinical nurse consultant in cardiac rehabilitation at Royal North Shore Hospital. She has extensive clinical experience in working with people with cardiac disease, which includes development of many educational resources. And she has a specific interest in the role of lifestyle choices and the importance of exercise in the ongoing management and prevention of heart disease. So thank you so much, both of you, for volunteering your time to, share all your amazing, amazing skills. So thank you very, very much.
Thank you, Jen. Thank you.
Right. And most of you will know Chris. Chris is one of our wonderful ambassadors who also volunteers his time to speak with us and run these webinars for us. So anyone who was at our last webinar will know that Chris has been travelling the countryside of Australia in his camper van for the last few months, and we're fortunate to have him from Adelaide today chatting with us. So thank you so much, Chris. And just a reminder, fill out the poll and any questions in the Q&A box. And now I'll hand you over to Chris.
Well, thanks a lot, Jen. And yes, welcome to everybody. I see a couple of messages coming up saying that you can't see us. Hopefully, if you have any questions, just send a chat note through to Jen and then she can have a look at why that may be. But we encourage you to put your questions in. This is a really important topic. And as many of you know, I had a heart attack in 2004 when I fell into some very cold water at the age of 51. Up in the Hawkesbury, and was really only, I think, able to resume what I see as a very fulsome schedule of now retirement, including this big round Australia trip, enjoying my grandchildren and all the other things you can do, thanks to a combination of the way the heart attack was handled in the acute sense, but also in particular how it was handled in the rehab sense. Now, we all hear all sorts of stories about the public health system. My experience was amazing. The rehab program back in 2004, and I'm sure it's even more advanced now, was quite astonishing and certainly beyond our expectations. And I'm very delighted today to be able to chat with Anne and Maura. Anne, in particular, was involved in the program in 2004 when I was first had my heart attack, and I must say it hasn't changed at all since. It looks exactly the same, and I'm sure with now all this extra experience, she's going to be a massive aid to us understanding this. Certainly, there's no doubt that the evidence would say that after a coronary event, readmissions or death, is certainly a high probability, but it's been reduced by over 50% by these rehab programs. So that's how important they are. So to start off, maybe I could start, Maura. You're the head honcho of heart rehab for us. Tell us, what is cardiac heart rehab?
Oh, thanks, Chris. And always good to hear of a patient's experience, a positive patient's experience from cardiac rehab. And indeed, we still get a lot of great feedback. But to answer your question, cardiac rehab, it's a lot of things, but I'll start by saying it's a structured program. Typically, it would start with if the patient is, say, from one of our local health district hospitals by a nurse and or sometimes a exercise physiologist attending the patient at the bedside after they've had an acute event. And, the nurse will talk to the patient and get their understanding of what's happened, talk them through in plain and simple English, if you like, there's a lot of jargon used in hospitals. So it really starts there at the bedside with the patient. Talking about their discharge home, planning for their discharge home, introducing cardiac rehab services, which really encompasses education. There's a series of education on a broad range of topics around lifestyle and exercise. So before COVID, which seems a long time ago, we had we recommended people would come into the hospital, into the inpatient gym twice a week for an hour's exercise. Prior to that, they would have an assessment again with a nurse and a cardiac nurse and an exercise physiologist to sit down with the patient and to go through their goals and their understanding of care. And once they've had the assessment, so there's a few measures we take there at the pre-assessment, and sometimes patients say, for whatever reason, we might just opt for the to tune into the education sessions or do both. It's quite flexible. And now, of course, we offer an online, due to the COVID environment, we're offering an online education and delivery of exercise. So, it's really supporting the patient once they get home from that sometimes really short stay in hospital when a lot of things have happened to them. We educate them on, the risk factors, diet, lifestyle, the importance of exercise. And whilst they were coming in for exercise, that face-to-face connection is really advantageous for a number of reasons. They would also meet other people, and as I'm sure you did, Chris, in a similar situation, and gain confidence to exercise and hear other people's stories, that they're not alone. And I think a big part of it is just, some people don't want to do anything after they've had, a heart event. Other people, we deal with a broad range of people as well. It could be a young athletic person, and sometimes they're hard to rein in because they want to do too much too soon, all the way up to a frail elderly person that needs to, maintain their function of everyday life. So we have a broad range of people. So really it is education and exercise and supporting people, and referral to other services as required.
Maura, how has it changed? Obviously it's been going for at least 17 years, because that's my experience. I don't know when rehab first became part of a post-heart event program, but how has it changed over the last, say, 20 odd years in what you've actually put into the program?
Well, I wonder, Anne might be better. She's been in the service a lot longer than I have. But look, and please jump in, Anne, but how has it changed? It's certainly changed in recent times because of the environment we've had to adapt to, and technology will be always part of, I think, going forward, because it gives people a lot of options. But I guess over time, procedures have changed, which, different medications are used. Things change over time with research-based, with evidence-based. And what would you like to add something there, how it's changed?
I think it's just evolved with time, because now, sort of 20, 30 years ago, people spent a lot longer in hospital.
Yes.
And so now, it's like a drive-through. You pick up your stent and you keep going. So it's, I think there's probably a much greater need for that outpatient follow-up where people get questions answered, because I think there is that sense that they kind of barely realize what's happened. You come in, you get your stent, you feel good, and away you go. So I mean, the program has obviously evolved. It's a multidisciplinary program, and it involves, you know, nurses, dietitians, various people. There's a lot more focus now, as Maura mentioned, on sort of your mental and emotional health. You know, we recognize that as a you know, a significant contributor to, you know, your recovery, and so I think it just it as Maura says, it kind of evolves with the passage of time, and of course more recently telehealth and you know, that all those sorts of things. So I think, and it's got bigger, you know, I think there's a lot more on offer now. It's far more flexible in terms of what people can take out of the program.
Sure.
So there are some factors that we can control and some that we can't control. What's the best, you know, well, first of all, what are the things that we can control, and what's the best way to control them after a heart attack or a heart event, Anne?
So I think, you know, obviously there's no one single cause for heart disease, heart attacks. There are certain risk factors which increase your risk of developing heart disease. There's also a lot we don't know, you know, in terms of, I think the heart research has been supporting a study which Gemma Figtree has been doing, where we've actually had patients, I think up to 25% of patients who don't have the traditional risk factors. So research is looking into that, but the traditional risk factors, the ones that you can change, which is what we term the modifiable ones, would be things like smoking. If you've got diabetes, if you're overweight or obese, physical inactivity is a big one. I think depression, social isolation, and of course, poor diet. You know, diet has a significant role to play, not only in sort of ensuring your long-term health, but also trying to prevent people becoming overweight and obese. And everything is kind of interlinked, because if you're not very active, you're more likely to put on weight, and your cholesterol is more likely to go up. And I would just mention here that there's a difference between dietary cholesterol and cholesterol. I think one of the questions we had prior to this session was about the link between cholesterol and heart disease. And whilst dietary cholesterol, the guidelines have changed, and when I talk about that, it's things like the cholesterol you find in red meats, shellfish, dairy products. It's the saturated fats that we worry about, and the saturated fats actually lead to an increase in your LDL, which is known as a bad cholesterol. L stands for lousy. So yeah, there's kind of, and all of those things essentially are related to lifestyle. So the good news is that there's actually a lot you as an individual can do to try and prevent further problems, to stabilize things, and actually just feel better and live longer.
Yeah, L stands for lousy and H stands for horsome. But you know, there's a very good website within the Heart Research Australia web, where they talk about the 4 M's in terms of preventative strategy, which are basically what you outline: movement, exercise, meals, measurement of health, and optimistic mental attitude.
Yeah.
Would you add to any of those in terms of post-heart event suggestions for people?
Look, I think the 4 M's actually incorporate a lot of things. And I think the one that is also sort of keeps us all honest is the measurement. And I think everybody's different. But I think sometimes, you know, like if you jump on the scales and you measure your weight, say weekly, or you measure the steps that you do from the step, you know, whether it's your phone or a pedometer, all of those things help to keep us in check. It's called self-monitoring and helping people to self-manage. I mean, things like meals, you know, there's a lot of information out there, and I would encourage people to check out the Australian guidelines, because obviously they're updated regularly. There's lots of information, and it is always being updated, because obviously it's a bit of a moving feast, you know, as more information becomes available. Really important to move. I mean, I can't stress enough the importance of physical activity. And I often say to people, if we could bottle the benefits of physical activity, we'd have a winning combination. The problem is physical activity requires self-motivation, and we have to do it. And that's where it's kind of not always easy to maintain that motivation and, you know, sort of keep that balance in your life, essentially. I think the only thing that I would probably add, and it's probably to do with the mental approach, is there's something that I call the disease of busyness. And basically that's this modern world where we have so much technology. Our kids are busy, everybody's busy, and with that it becomes difficult to actually fit in exercise. You know, I think life balance is quite a hard thing to sustain, making sure that you have time for relaxation, that you have time for exercise, eating healthily, getting enough sleep, those sorts of things. And yet I think they play a really important role in terms of your mental health and your ability to kind of transform your lifestyle.
Yeah, I think my experience too, Anne, is that, you know, habit is a big part of that. And the way I noticed that was I broke my foot, and then just after I'd recovered from that, I snapped an Achilles.
Yeah.
And so I ended up with about 6 months in a boot, one of those things that effectively stops you walking any great distance. To get back into the habit of going in my morning walks again, having completely got out of the habit, especially in retirement, I'm quite a disciplined person, but that took some doing, and this trip actually has been very good for me in getting fully back into that habit again. I wonder how important habit is in a lot of these things, both in the movement, in the meals, probably the measurement. And one thing I would like you to talk about a bit more is how rehab helps with mental approach.
I think I think knowledge is power, and I think what rehab does is it sort of gives people the information, and it helps them so the education component. There's education from the various health disciplines, the dietitian, the pharmacist, an exercise physiologist, managing stress. So all of that is encompassed in the education. So that gives you the information that you need to sort of perhaps try and adopt a healthier lifestyle. And then there's a structured exercise, and with that comes the huge benefit of that peer support. And that's something, you know, you might see, I think Maura mentioned, you know, that I think that support is really I think it's kind of something that's undervalued to some extent, you know. And what we found during COVID is, you know, people have that telehealth, but they don't have that face-to-face support from either the health professionals or their peers, you know, and that is huge. I mean, I haven't had a heart attack. I think listening to somebody who's been through it and who's actually coming out the other side, and I think we always want to focus on what you can do, and that there is life, and often a really good life, because something like this actually motivates you to improve your lifestyle and to prioritize your health.
So with this mental attitude, one of the elements in that was, as I remember in my case, was a young lady who came out with the task of trying to teach me how to meditate. Now, my wife's reaction to that is good luck, because that's not something I really fit into my day at all, and certainly not then. I mean, how important is it to learn how to switch off like that?
Or maybe you'd like to.
Meditation, it could be that, or it could be relaxation. I guess finding a way, it could be different for different people. I mean, I would personally find it quite difficult to meditate. But I wonder if that could be like a diversional therapy almost, and finding something that you can relax at. To switch off. Maybe that's, I mean, there's certainly people that do like meditation, and it is more front of mind these days. And I guess we focus on positive attitude and behavioural change. And I think our occupational therapist talks a bit about relaxation and meditation. And I certainly think that's a very healthy approach. What it may be for you. I mean, some people can meditate at the drop of a hat. Other people, like myself, it might be better just to do something that I enjoy, whether it be a relaxation or a hobby. I think that all builds into that switching off that stress and yeah. So perhaps in the future we'll be doing more about mindfulness and meditation. It does come up from time to time, and there are other places to go. Perhaps we refer people, whether it be a yoga or a meditation class, that there's certainly plenty of them around. It's just tuning into what suits you, I think. But
so Maura, there's a lot of people involved in rehab. I'm talking from the not the professional side, but from the patient's personal side. In my case, my wife was absolutely my strength and driver through that period. And so she was very much part of the team. So I guess you've got carers as well that help people who perhaps don't have the benefit of that. You have, other family members. Who actually comes to the rehab program?
From the sort of patient perspective, obviously, it's mostly those that have had a recent event that we may have visited in hospital. We do get referrals from GPs and other hospitals outside of the LHD, but we've always encouraged their next of kin, whether partner, carer, to join in, and they can still do that, particularly with the education, because sometimes it will need, the lifestyle change, if you can support it through the whole family or promote it through the whole family. So not one person's making a salad and the other person's having a hamburger, or whatever the case may be, that there's a consistency with the lifestyle. So it might be encouraging the partner to go for a walk with the patient who's had the event. So it's encouraging, we encourage that, full support, so it's people that have had recent, if you're asking about the patients, it's usually recent cardiac events, whether it be surgery or a procedure, an elective procedure. And also proactively too, sometimes GPs will refer someone with a major risk factor who wants to engage in the program, but predominantly it's patients that have had a recent cardiac event.
And I mean, what percentage of people who have had heart events, be it a prophylactic event like a stent or a bypass or a heart attack itself, what percentage of those actually turn up and do the rehab programs in your experience?
Unfortunately, it's probably only about 30% of patients that go on to attending cardiac rehab. And there's probably a number of reasons for that. I mean, it could be awareness. It could be other barriers that we're trying to break down. We really need our cardiologists and our GPs to really promote, and some do, it should be just a natural flow on from your discharge that you were encouraged to attend a cardiac rehab program. For some people, it might be work commitments down the track. It might be, they're depressed or feeling down. The ones that really need to come often don't. We've had patients come along that sort of weren't that keen, and they've ended up being one of our best participants. They got a lot out of the program. So unfortunately, it's still rather low, the percentage of people that actually go on to do some form of cardiac rehab, sitting around 30%, I think.
And if you were, I mean, in some sense, I suppose you're a salesperson of these people, you and your team, to get them to come back while they're a captive audience sitting
Yes.
in the bed in the hospital. So what's the best selling feature that you give them? That, I mean, we all know subliminally what the reasons are, of course, but what's the selling feature that gets them across the line usually to decide to come or not come?
Well, I think it could be the clinician approach, getting them at the right time, and you engage with them well and encourage them to come along, that it's a flexible program and that we're here to come to an assessment, and then we can, usually that's the first step. I think it is a big plus to capture that patient at the bedside, and albeit they see so many people in hospital, but if you can engage well with the patient, and I think give them time to ask you questions. So it's about that engagement, I think is a big plus. So I think the selling point is awareness of the service and yeah, just asking them what their goals might be. And I think people want that support through the recovery. As Anne was saying before, some of the hospital stays are very short. You've had a heart attack, get over it almost, get out. With the best intent, people are going to do well at home if they have the right support. And I think it's also that peer support. That's what struck me the most, particularly amongst the men, which are our biggest audience. That come to cardiac rehab, and the support, you see them sharing numbers, and I think it's their phone numbers and contacts for coffees and catch-ups, which is a big part of their recovery, just having that, knowing that other people have been through what they've been through. But I think, to get back to your question, I think that engagement at the bedside and just explaining what our aim is, and taking time to hear their story and answer their questions. So I think that engagement's probably key to getting them along. And I think it speeds up their recovery. To know that cardiac rehab will actually enhance their recovery, I think is a good selling point.
So in my case, I went from a 51-year-old who still believed in immortality to someone who was about to die in sort of about 10 seconds. So that was a fair sort of a motivation to do all the things that, that the nurse suggested. But what you find, there's a difference between encouraging people who have just had like a stent or some sort of preventative measure versus someone who's had the full Monty?
So like a bypass or open surgery, you mean?
Yeah.
I wonder, if you've gone through a bypass, you've got that scar, you've got the recovery slower, you've got more time. And I think you've got, it takes longer to recover from open heart surgery than it does a stent. A stent's, almost a drive-through procedure. And for some people that may or may not have a big impact on them. I personally think it would have a huge impact on me if I was to have a stent. And it might be that mortality thing as well, like you facing your own mortality. But I would wonder if it's around, the invasiveness of having open heart surgery and that longer recovery period that might encourage you to come. That might be the difference. Having said that, we get plenty of people that have stents, and it's a point of their life where they can really turn it around if they've been inactive or they haven't, spending hours and hours at work and they're stressed. I wonder if that recovery time gives them, they need that recovery time and to join in a group, although group sessions aren't for everybody either, but a lot of people get a lot out of it. You've got to come in, you've got to go in, you mix. And there's incidental learning that goes on too in cardiac rehab. So it's formal, we have formal education, but there's lots of incidental, they'll come up to you with a question while they're exercising or, during the exercise. And, that's where a lot of that incidental learning happens. So, I suppose that you could argue that open heart, that more invasive procedure is more of a reminder that your recovery takes a bit longer and you may benefit, maybe. Anne, thoughts on that?
Yeah, no, I think so. I think you've got a lot more questions about recovery and what you can and can't do if you've got if you've had a stenotomy.
Absolutely.
So I think it's certainly probably a more of a persuasive argument to go. But I think you're right as well. It depends on your experience. If it's an elective stent, I think that you're probably not as motivated to go. But if you've had an event like a heart attack, I think it's quite scary. So
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So Maura, do you allow anyone to join your rehab programs? Or do they have to have had a heart event or a heart attack? And you just say, wait, you've had your heart attack, then you can come?
Look, we'd love to welcome more people, and we do. Look, predominantly it is people that have had a heart event because we've got limited, unfortunately, resources. But that said, we have had the odd cancer patient, an endocrine patient, different patients that that have a risk of having a heart attack or a heart event or heart disease. So we would like to welcome everyone, and generally, we've got a pretty broad church of people that come, but if we had more resources, we certainly could. There's very good evidence for all diagnosis to exercise. It's one of the best prescriptions you can have, really. So we try not to exclude, but we have to create capacity for patients coming through, and certainly you can have heart risk. You can have risk factors for heart disease and come to cardiac rehab.
So is there a sort of a national agreed guideline between all of the hospitals on the syllabus for this program, or does every hospital just do their own thing? How does that work?
Yeah, look, I'd say the programs vary from, and we've got to know, one of the silver linings of COVID is we do have the community of practice. So we do tap in online to regional areas that may have a slightly different program. Our area health here in North Sydney is very similar. We run very similar, slightly different. Some are more equipment-based programs, for example, but we're guided by the core components, the national guidelines there. So obviously in rural areas, they may not. We've got the luxury of having exercise physiologists, which is a fantastic resource to have. So I think guided by the core components, but there will be, there'll be slight variations wherever you go. Even throughout metropolitan Sydney, I think there's slight variations. But for our northern Sydney, we have staff going from different campuses, so we run a fairly similar program.
So, and I wonder if we could maybe have a look at the detail of some of these programs, the facets of them. Could I start with nutrition? Now, I'm a cattle production specialist in agriculture, so I see so many varying recommendations about things like red meat and animal products, a lot of them coming from clearly a conflicted background where they're trying to sell the products versus people whose focus is on some other fundamental. It could be animal welfare, it could be health, could be the environment. There seem to be such a range of views, and it's very hard to work out what is good data and what is what I would call data-free opinion, particularly in nutrition. I wonder how people sort, and how in your rehab program you actually sort out the data-supported facts from some of the fiction that are fed by various interest groups around the place, and how people decide how they get that balance and moderation between all the elements of their diet.
Look, I think it's, and I would just say that I'm not a dietitian, and that's why we have a dietitian attached to our program. So there is a session or 2 sessions on dietary advice, and it's all based on the national and international guidelines. I think my advice at the bedside to patients, because people are always interested in diet, it's always something that creates a lot of interest, is don't overthink it. Try and keep it simple. So my basic message initially would be eat fresh food, small portion, and when you have a plate, try and have a quarter of that plate as protein. Try and have the other quarter as carbohydrate and half as vegetables. So we don't recommend excluding food groups. There's a lot of diets out there, and I'm not qualified to make a comment on those, but I think it's really important not to get to complicate things too much. I think that healthy food, go for a healthy dietary pattern rather than a diet, something that you can sustain. If you exclude food groups, it's really very hard to sustain that. But again, I think the other option is to speak to your GP and go to a dietitian, because everybody's got different needs. You might have somebody with heart disease who might also be a diabetic, or might have kidney problems. So I think it needs to be tailored to the individual. The advice that we would give people in cardiac rehab is from our dietitian, who is basing all her advice. And there's a New South Wales Health government website, and they provide Australian guidelines. The American Heart Association came out fairly recently with updates. So it's continuous being updated. And I think it is hard for people, because one minute they're saying 2 eggs a week, and the next minute they're saying, no, you can have eggs every day. But you've got to realize that it's an evolving, there's so much research, and as the research comes out, so the guidelines are updated. But the bottom line is just aim for healthy dietary patterns and eat fresh foods and avoid processed foods and refined carbohydrates, things like that, which we know aren't good for us.
And would you say that a 1-sentence summary would be moderation in all things?
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, it seems to me that that's where we go wrong. We get 1 minute told we can't have any of this, and the next minute we said, oh no, we actually should have more of that. And it seems to me quite often that some middle point is where we're at, which seems so common sense. But
yeah.
How do people actually work through that? I think that's the most common question that I've heard is, particularly in agriculture, is how do I know who is right here?
No, and you're absolutely right. I mean, the classic one is butter or margarine, but even in the guidelines, they say, look, if you don't like margarine for whatever reason, then a small amount of butter is not going to do you any harm. It's things like that. You've just got to, I think, extract something that's going to work for you. And if you're not sure, you can always chat to a dietitian and get that one-on-one advice. But I think, I just think sometimes people can overthink and overcomplicate it, and then it all gets too hard. I mean, we all know that donuts aren't good for us, and that's so there's a lot of common sense, and I think that you've got to sort of base your sort of just on the general findings, and there's lots of information out there, but just if you get too caught up in the detail, then you'll kind of feel anxious about everything you're eating.
And so if we can move on to exercise then, again, people are time poor. They're in some cases not used to, they're certainly not people that are used to before their heart attack having a 5-kilometre run every morning. How do you actually build that in so that it doesn't seem like a hill that's too hard to climb for these people?
Look, I think with exercise, the trick is, it goes back to what you were saying, Chris. It's that habit. It's sort of incorporating regular exercise into your daily routine. Now, whether that be sort of, I mean, the Heart Foundation guidelines say aim for 30 minutes a day minimum, but you can also, there's information out there about interval training and sort of slightly higher intensity interval training. But again, that's something which would have to be discussed on an individual basis. But the bottom line is, get out there and walk. We need to get active. We need to take opportunities. So it's not just about going out for that half-hour walk. It's also about an opportunity to be active. So when you look at an escalator, instead of riding it, walk up the escalator. You know, use opportunities to incorporate exercise into your daily routine. And I think if it becomes a habit, then you do it without even thinking about it. Because the problem is, and it's that disease of busyness again, when you get busy, the first thing that kind of goes out the window is you probably don't eat healthily, and you probably don't do, you cut out the exercise. So it's about sort of prioritizing your health. And there's nothing like a heart attack to help you to prioritize your health. And also, I mean, it goes back to, you talked about meditation, and I think meditation isn't for everybody, but actually if you go out for a walk and you listen to some music or a podcast, it takes you into another place. It's a stress reliever. So I think the benefits of exercise are huge. It doesn't have to be onerous. It has to be what you want. It has to be achievable. And, you know, I think some people think, you know, that they've got to work harder to get the benefits. You don't necessarily have to. But if that's something you're interested in, then get the correct advice. And, you know, I think exercise is such a good thing to, in terms of everything, in terms of lifestyle. It affects your weight management, your blood pressure. You know, it has so many benefits. So I think it's a really important thing that people need to sort of think about, trying to start small, but, you know, start off by doing a little bit and then build on that.
So Maura, you know, when I was in the Pulses group, it was called at North Shore, that group had, the oldest bloke was a guy who was, I think, 92. And every time you asked how he was, his answer was always still vertical, which he found very encouraging.
Yeah.
And then the youngest was a guy of about 35 who'd had a heart attack. I think he'd had a full heart attack. There's obviously a huge variation there in what capability and you know, if you push the 35-year-old only as fast as the 92-year-old, well, he's going to be underdone, and vice versa. How do you actually manage that in your rehab groups to cater for that spread?
Yeah, good question. So we'll go back to phase 2. I know the Pulses group that you're talking about, and that's more your maintenance. So in the more initial phases, which we call phase 2, we have an assessment. So the patient would typically, and we mentioned it before, we can have just the age range you've mentioned, all with their individual goals. And, you know, the assessment provides us time to sit down with them, and particularly with our exercise physiologists. And I can't sing their praises enough, because they're the key to the exercise element of this, of the rehab. So they will prescribe exercise initially in that phase 2 that you know, to work them at a level that is appropriate for them. So if it's 35-year-old, most of the time, not all, but most of the time they can do more than an older person, but depending on their exercise history. So we take a number of measures. We look at what they've done in the past, and we also ask the patient, what is it that you want to achieve here? And you have to take into consideration things like sternal wounds. I mean, we don't get people doing push-ups or on rowing machines in the initial phases. But it's about, you know, and then you have other patients that don't push themselves enough. So it's that confidence with that prescription, which we call a prescription of exercise, that the exercise physiologist delivers, will determine, what's right for each person, depending on, what they've had done, what the history of exercise is, and what they want to achieve. So when they come along to a maintenance, when they reach the maintenance phase, as is the pulses, they've done their phase 2, and hopefully they're incorporating exercise outside, because we also encourage them to go on that walk, to ride the bike, do something they enjoy that's appropriate and safe for them. When they get to a maintenance phase, we trust them that they will work at their own pace, and we're also monitoring their, if they're going too hard or if their technique isn't great. That's why we have staff there supervising them, and it still happens in pulses or in the maintenance phase. So it's really, us supervising the people exercising, and it could be, stopping the 94-year-old might be going too hard. The 35-year-old could work at a higher intensity, and we also, keep measurement of progress. They work through week by week, and once they get to a maintenance phase, they're usually doing pretty well. But we do, as you said, it's an amazing group, and we do have a wide range of ages that attend that. We might start people off on the bike that might have wonky knees. So we've got to take into consideration all of those limitations people have, and we monitor them and talk through their progress with them. So it's a safe environment, as opposed to just going to a gym and doing your own thing. So they are monitored, and their technique is looked at. One of the things that I do remember, and it even surprised me a bit when I first started attending the classes as a nurse, was, taking their observations when they came in. So we don't do that in pulses per se, but in the phase 2, the more acute group. So you take their blood pressure on arrival, and sometimes they were running in and they were stressed, and the blood pressure would be up. We get them to do a warm up, start doing the exercise. At the end of the hour, we take their blood pressure, and lo and behold, in most cases, there was a good drop in blood pressure. So they could see the benefit right there and then, and that's something that stood out for me. So that simple, taking the blood pressure as they came in and measuring it after they've done a good workout on the way out was quite often really a pleasant and positive surprise. And I think we share that. They all want to know what their blood pressure is.
I must say, I also found it useful. I mean, if you're in a class and the only people around you are all built like greyhounds and going 100 miles an hour, you sort of feel a bit inadequate. One of the good thing about pulses is there was always someone in there you could relate to, and you say, oh, well, I'm not that much worse than him. So he might be going like a racehorse, but these guys are working at my pace, so I feel comfortable in that environment. But the downside is your ability to be able to make sure that everyone's working up to their sort of capability and not overdoing it or underdoing it.
That's right. And most people, as long as they're, if they're coming to a maintenance class, they're usually there for the reason that they are really engaged in exercise and they can see the benefit. So whilst, there might be a few people that chatter a bit because it's a very social group, the purpose is there to keep their fitness levels up and it can have all sorts of things like maintaining a balance, preventing falls. All of those things were important. And, lots of people's balance is poor, for example, when they come in. My own included, actually, when you start testing it. So, that's also another positive. And the social, they're a great social group. And that social connection was built usually from coming to the phase 2 component of cardiac rehab.
So, Anne, I know you're not a pharmacologist, and you don't obviously give advice about medicines, but what do you help patients in their rehab program as regards suddenly I'd never taken a pill in my life, and suddenly I'm presented with this raft. I felt like a 100-year-old person when they presented me these boxes of things I had to take every day. So I guess the problem there is, one, staying on them because that's going to save your life, but B, understanding them. How do you go about that in rehab?
I think, what I usually say to people, Chris, is sort of treatment of coronary artery disease, heart disease, is a three-pronged attack. So the surgeon or the interventionist might put the stent in, there's medications, and then there's lifestyle. Now, what we've got to do is we treat the blockage or the sort of focal area that's causing a problem. And then we've got to take a systemic approach, because coronary artery disease, as you know, it can basically, cardiovascular disease is an umbrella term for heart and blood vessel disease. So we have to take a systemic approach in order to prevent further problems, and stabilize if they've got any other narrowing in the arteries, to stabilize that and try and prevent it from getting worse. So that's the important role of the medication. And essentially, the medication is designed to do that, is to take a systemic approach and prevent further problems. And the medication that you are routinely put on is ideally they're all recommended by international guidelines. You're usually on some blood thinning tablets if you've had a stent. You're usually on something to lower your cholesterol, and often something to lower your blood pressure. And it's all aimed at trying to reduce your risk of a further event. So I think what's important, and that's why cardiac rehab is important, is that one of the sessions is by the pharmacist to actually try and explain to people why we're suggesting that they take these medications. Having said that, Chris, it's a shared decision. It's really important that people have kind of they have their input and they are able to address any concerns, because, as you know, statins receive ongoing sort of attention in the media. And so people obviously do have concerns. So it's important that we're able to address those and hopefully give them the knowledge to understand the benefits. And as I say, it's not just about sort of fixing that focal area. It's about really trying to prevent not only heart attacks, but strokes moving forward.
So just briefly too, I mean, I think we all know so much about smoking and its ills. The first person to arrive at my bed, I must say, was a quit person who arrived at the bed and said, "I'm here to help you quitting smoking." And I said, "Well, this is going to be your easiest day because I've never smoked in my life." But, a huge number of people do have smoking issues. Well, how do you go about helping them with that beyond what's already available out in the community? Not to mention half your income goes out in paying for them at the moment.
Yeah. Look, I think I always say to people, the best quit campaign is your first heart attack. So there's nothing like a heart attack to sort of give people a fright. Interestingly enough, probably only about 16 or 17% of the Australian population smoke. The number of smokers we see actually in cardiac rehab are remarkably few. And I suppose it's all about, first of all, finding out what their thoughts are. And it's no good going in there and saying, "You've got to stop smoking." It's actually saying, "Have you thought about it? And most people actually want to stop. It's just not easy because nicotine is a highly addictive substance." And I think it's really important not to make people feel that they're sort of at fault there, because most of them started smoking in their youth, and it was a cigarette in the playground, and you need as little as 7 cigarettes to become addicted. So it's an incredibly addictive substance. So it's finding out what they want to do. And as you say, you've got the quit line, which is actually a really good resource. The GP is a really good resource because obviously there's nicotine replacement therapy, and if it's prescribed correctly, and although you can buy it over the counter, we always say that if you've had a recent heart event, you should do it under medical supervision. So there's lots of things out there, and there are psychologists who also specialize in smoking cessation, because it's not only that reliance on nicotine, but it's also habit forming. You get up in the morning and you have a cup of coffee in the paper and out comes a cigarette. That's a lot of times what people say, that it's associated with things that they enjoy. So it's not something we see nearly as much, but often the people who are still smoking are the people who, though they want to give up, have found it really hard.
That's right.
So I think, it's clear that the benefits of the program are massive. How do people actually get to participate, particularly in my world, country people who I think struggle to find some of these things available? And I see some of the questions that have been coming in about, someone who lives in the middle of Victoria. How do they actually find out where their rehab program is that they can go and benefit from all of this? Maura, how would you suggest they go about it?
Yeah, usually the hospital where you're being treated, if it's, it's usually you're an inpatient scenario. So we would refer patients. We do have some regional and rural patients that come to North Shore for procedures. So we would refer to their closest centre, which is often can be a long way from them. But generally, I wonder things now may change with having online services, the flexibility then to reach those people. And indeed, lots of regional places are providing online support and exercise as well. So generally, it's a referral from the clinicians at your hospital refer you to your nearest cardiac rehabilitation centre.
So anyone who's got under heart treatment, if they ask their hospital, where's your rehab program, there should be an answer to that question.
There's a register of, they're registered generally, so there's a referral process to their closest centre if they wish to attend, yes.
And is there a cost for someone, that's a Medicare card owner?
Yeah, it's Medicare. There's no cost. So it's a wonderful free support service. So no cost. It's covered by Medicare.
And can I ask both of you, just finally, we could talk about this for a while because it's a great topic, and I can see from the questions how many people are surprised at the extent of it, and I think I was when I went in. But how do you, Anne and Maura, separately measure your success in your program? What is your vision personally for what you would like to say, yes, I've had a good day or a good year or a good decade here?
Well, I guess the number of patients that complete the program is always very positive. We get a lot of, and we look at their measures that they've actually individually improved as a result of attending cardiac rehab. We get a lot of positive patient feedback. So we have an evaluation form that they complete. But obviously it would be, that they've had individual improvement on, say, their weight or they're actually exercising. And we do follow up with them 6-12 months down the track to see how they're progressing. But obviously the completion and participation is a good measure, I think, that we've got our data on that.
Yeah, look, I think that's basically all patients that come into the program. We do some clinical measurements and we do some physical measurements, and all of those measures, and it includes things like weight, blood pressure, waist circumference, cholesterol levels, and it's always a breakdown of the cholesterol, looking at the good and the bad cholesterol. Not that we can claim for that, it's usually the statins that have worked wonders on reducing people's cholesterol, but as well, it's really important we evaluate patients' feedback, their satisfaction, and so there's a whole combination of things we look at. Number of patients we actually saw in hospital, and how out of those, how many actually came back to the program when we'd referred them. Obviously, we're only looking at patients who are referred to North Shore in terms of that. But yeah, there's lots of measures, and at the moment they're just setting up a national database where hopefully we'll have some good outcome measures from services across New South Wales, so you can actually make comparisons and look at if it's working, basically.
Yeah, and I think preventing readmissions too, it's a little bit of a grey area, but I think that cardiac rehab will have some better data on that in the future. But also, preventing readmission to hospital, I think, would be another indicator.
Well, an interesting statistic I was just looking at before I came on is that 1 in 3 heart attacks are a repeat event. So, and we know that coming to cardiac rehab can reduce that repeat event, and a huge part of that is getting people to understand that there's a lot they can do to prevent further problems. It's sort of it's all about the individual and what they can do to not only prevent the risk of a further event, but also improve their lifestyle and improve their well-being and general health.
Well, look, I think that, in finality, I'll hand back to you, Jenny, but it really brings me to a sort of thank God moment. Thank God for the Mauras and the Anns and your teams, because certainly from my experience, you combined with the acute care has given me 17 years of life that I was on a good chance of not having. And hopefully a bit more to come, God willing. But the whole experience for me has just proven how lucky we are to live in Australia. And it's just sad that not everybody either knows about it or takes advantage of them. And because lifestyle is as much about this as death. It's all very well being alive, but if you can't experience a full life, you know, that's also a serious cost to you personally and to the society. So rehab is such a big part of that. Thank you both so much for running such a selfless program, and something that I think is so important. And Jen, I know you've got some questions, so can I hand back to you? Maybe you can put
sure.
those.
We've got quite a few questions. I've tried to kind of summarize ones that are similar and combine them and so on. But interestingly, from the poll, it said that 59% of the people who came along today hadn't done rehab, and 56% of them weren't actually recommended rehab. So I think, coming back to Chris's point before, if somebody's not someone who's come along here, or they've got a friend or a family member who has a heart event or surgery and they're not recommended cardiac rehab from their hospital, should they be calling the hospital and saying, can I book in? How do I get a referral? Should be on the onus for someone who suffers from the heart event to get that referral if they're not mentioned it in hospital?
Yeah, you know, the other thing actually in hospital is, and I know that people see so many people, you know, and that's another issue, is that in that 48-hour period that you may be in hospital, they see 101 people. And so often it's something that they don't necessarily remember. And that's not a criticism. It's just we know that people have overload of information. But yes, certainly if anybody is eligible to come to cardiac rehab, and certainly if they've had a recent cardiac event, and all they need to do is to phone their local hospital and find out where their closest one is if they don't know. And then usually most cardiac rehabs will want a referral from their GP, but the easiest thing is probably to phone the local hospital and ask if they've got a cardiac rehab. All the major hospitals will have. Some of the smaller areas, they will be run from the community centre, but most people, we've got a whole book of, people could obviously call us if they weren't sure, and we could probably give them details of their closest cardiac rehab.
Yeah. We have quite a specific question from someone who said she'd been diagnosed with an angiogram with cardiac, forgive my pronunciation, amyloidosis, a stiff heart. My cardiologist had suggested I have cardiac rehabilitation, but with COVID regulations, that hasn't happened. She's interested to hear your suggestions, and she said there are days that she's just so breathless to do the required half-hour walk.
Yes, I think so with that, she would obviously really benefit from some face-to-face exercise. And certainly at the moment, I mean, hopefully we're moving towards getting back to some sort of face-to-face, perhaps not this year, but certainly next year. But certainly we can do a telehealth appointment, or her closest cardiac rehab could offer that. And an exercise physiologist could talk to her and give her suggestions. We are also offering some online exercise. So there are different options. And I think the thing is that it's, you know, the half-hour walk isn't suitable for everybody, and you need to start small, but there's a lot you can do even with seated exercises. And we didn't really talk about strength training, but there's a huge role for doing some resistance training, but again, under supervision. So if that person wants to contact us, they're very welcome, and we can chat about options, whether it's referring her to somewhere that's a bit closer, so that when face-to-face is re-established, that she can then do some face-to-face, because there are certain times where it doesn't, you know, telehealth doesn't quite offer the same sort of advantages that perhaps face-to-face would.
Yeah. So speaking of returning to live events, is there any talk of Royal North Shore Hospital doing rehab again? And someone has also asked when pulses, I think one of your pulses, your lovely pulser people, I can't remember who it was now, has also asked, they said they were missing you, Anne, and were wanting to know when pulses were starting up.
Okay, I'm going to throw that one over to Maura as a manager.
Thanks, Anne. Oh, look, we're in very unknown territory at the moment in terms of restarting face-to-face. So we'll relook at that in probably next year and see what our options are. There's a lot of talk around, you know, having a good ventilated space for and numbers. So there's lots of conditions around that. So I think what we'd aim to do is start on a small scale for face-to-face when that's approved. then work our way through. We can't promise at this stage what's going to happen. We were, you know, looking at options this year, and look what happened. So we're in such I just don't want to promise anything at the moment. We're in very uncertain times, and hopefully things will get better. And we know that people miss that face-to-face contact, and it's really important. My ideal would be to have our own space, because we are sharing a space, which isn't ideal. But it would be lovely to have our own gym space, so we could really be flexible and, you know, run online classes from there as well as face-to-face. My idea would be a good ventilated space, so that was safe and that was pretty much for cardiac rehabilitation use. And we'd certainly look at, we'd have a lot more flexibility with the numbers of patients and the sessions we could run and the times, because we need to look at times that are flexible for people. And we'd love to encourage more women to participate. So if we had our own space, that would be my dream.
We've been talking about that for a while, haven't we, Maura?
We could. We have been, and we could.
I promised Maura that if I win Powerball or Lotto, I will buy.
Very kind of you, Jen. Oh dear, but
a list of other things that I want. So one of the other questions is there a clinical psychologist who's attached to the cardiac rehab program, and do you think that there's a need?
We do have some that we refer to. I just lost you there, the sound there for a minute. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Oh, good, good.
So the question was, would you see a need for a clinical psychologist attached to cardiac rehab?
Yeah, it'd be great to have our own, but we do have somebody that's very has a background in cardiac rehabilitation that we often refer patients to, and that's been a good support for us. But yes, part of the team, it would be good into the future. Yeah.
And this is a few questions. One question I had from someone before the webinar even started is, as we've spoken so much about guidelines, international and national, changing so frequently, how often are hospitals with cardiac rehab programs, how often is their information updated? And is there like a national guideline that hospitals follow and that gets updated with the new things? Or is it kind of each hospital runs their separate program and you don't really know how up to date your program is?
I mean, we have a professional body, the Australian Cardiac Rehab Association. So, and they obviously look at guidelines across the world. I mean, guidelines often sort of take, although things are changing, it takes sometimes a little while for guidelines to be updated. But I think most of us try and keep abreast of what, you know, we attend journal clubs and hear the latest research from the American Heart Association, from the European Heart Association. So there certainly are guidelines, and we are guided by those. But I think you've got to keep abreast of current research and what's currently being, but, you know, I think the answer to your question is basically all cardiac rehabs would follow the guidelines set out by the Cardiac Rehab Association in association with, you know, the various professional bodies.
Great. And just one last final question is, there's been a bit of mention about CardiHab, which is an online rehab program that seems to be used in regional areas. I know Heart Health New South Wales have been talking, there's someone from there, I think, that's been talking about some stuff that they do with regional, and it's been used in Queensland, Tassie and Vic. Have you guys heard of this, or?
We've certainly heard of it. Actually, when I first started in the service, I heard of CardiHab. Got it right?
Yeah.
And I guess in some ways it was, you know, before its time, really. I mean, there's probably a real need for that interactive app, and there are other apps out there too, I believe. So we didn't invest in that, but we're certainly looking at technology at the moment, because that will be the way forward. So we'll be looking at different applications, and yeah.
Great. Well, thank you so much. As I've said, Maura and Chris, they all donate their time to come along today to chat to everyone. And I found that incredibly helpful, and I hope that everybody else has as well. So as mentioned, I have recorded this, so I'll send the link out to everybody who signed up, and feel free to pass it on to family members or friends who you think may benefit from it as well. So thanks so much everyone for coming along, and thank you so much Maura, Anne and Chris for your wonderful webinar.
Pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you. And I'll just say hello. There's a few people online who I can see.
Yes,
who said
John
hello.
Millican has said hello to you.
Yeah, so we're just saying it's just nice to see so many familiar faces.
I was thinking you'd have a lot of familiar people on here, Anne.
And there's just one last thing I'd like to say, and I think it's something that Abraham Lincoln said, that it's not about the years in your life, it's about the life in your years. And I think that's really important, because we're all going to probably live, because of technology, well into our 90s. But if you can't walk, if you can't if you haven't got quality of life, and the trouble is, the older we get, the harder we've got to work at that. But the benefits are there, and it's worth it. So I was just
that's so beautiful, Anne. Thank you.
Keep moving.
Absolutely.
Okay,
Thanks so much, everyone. Bye.
Bye.